Welcome to DIY Minded. One of the features I love in my shop is this dedicated 4 foot by 8 foot cutting table. I use it for breaking down plywood and other sheet goods. I also use it as an assembly table sometimes and as a second workbench. Although I love having a dedicated table, it takes up too much space in my shop. For some time I've been planning on replacing it with a folding version. The finished result was a rolling 4 foot by 8 foot cutting station that I could fold down one wing and have a 4 foot by 64 inch cutting station, or a 32 inch by 48 inch cutting station. As one of my requirements for the project was for it to be made out of common materials, all the framework we build out of construction grade lumber. I start by breaking down a bunch of 2x8s into proper length. After cutting the boards to length, I move the table saw to rip them down. For those watching thinking that they can't build this project because they don't have all these expensive tools, all the fancy and expensive tools in the world will not make you a better woodworker. They just make things faster and easier. I really want to stiffen up the base of the table, so I'm using some leftover 1/4 inch plywood for both the sides. I want the plywood to be recessed into one of these vertical boards, so I'm running through the table saw a couple times to make a quick rabbet joint. You can see how handy this table is. The foam provides just enough grip that I don't have to have any clamps or hold downs. If you're thinking, I don't have a track saw, so why would I need this? It works great with circular saws as well. In fact, I used a track like this for many years before getting my track saw. It'll allow you to cut perfectly straight lines with any circular saw or router. As part of an easy build, I wanted to use simple, common hardware. Everything can be done with this stapler, which could easily be replaced with small nails, and I'll be using some 3 inch, 2 inch, and 1.5 inch screws. On the base, everything is going to be glued as well as screwed. I don't use glue when attaching the tabletop, you'll see later. That allows me to change it out if I were to accidentally cut too deep or to damage it. Make sure you pre-drill all your holes to avoid cracking, especially when screwing this close to the edge. I end up making 2 panels like this that will become the sides of the base. With the 2 sides standing up, you can see here how it's all going to come together. I connect these 2 side panels with the 3 inch wide boards I ripped earlier, gluing, pre-drilling, and screwing at all the joints. Make sure before screwing together that everything is square. Here's a nearly completed base, and as you can tell, there's been nothing complicated about the build thus far. As this thing is starting to get heavier, the next step is going to be to install the casters. But let's pause for a second and talk about casters, because they're not all created equally. This here is one of the mobile carts in my shop. As you can see, even with the caster locked, it can still swivel, meaning that the cart can move even though it will not roll. This is the caster I decided to go with. You can see when the lock is engaged, it prevents the wheel from turning. Also, there's a spline that you see here that engages when the lock is on, preventing the caster from swiveling. This will keep the table safely still when the casters are locked. Now back to the build, I screw on the casters. If your project was not completely square, then you might want to put a couple of washers underneath the casters to square things up. This also will give you the ability to level things out if you have an uneven concrete floor. Flipped right side up, it now rolls around the shop effortlessly. The table is going to have 4 fold-out legs, 2 on each side. I have some specific requirements I'll talk about in a second, but I'm not an engineer, so for me, the easiest way to accomplish what I wanted was to build this quick mock-up. This temp leg is attached with a continuous hinge or a piano hinge. During this mock-up, I have a straight board clamp to represent my tabletop. The first requirement for the leg is that there must be a consistent 1 inch gap when the leg is open. The next requirement is that when the table leg is folded up, I do not want the caster touching the floor. But in the open position, the caster needs to touch the floor. After playing with the prototype leg for a while and answering all my questions, I moved on to building the actual legs. I'm going to spare you the monotony of cutting all this lumber, so we'll just skip right to the part where it's all done. You'll notice here that I have 2 short and 2 long legs. The reason for this is that in the open position, they will end up being the same length. So with the prototype leg, I was able to determine that I need a taper on the backboard. I'm using this simple angle cutting jig, and to ensure that all 4 pieces are exactly alike, I just tack in a nail right here, so that way each piece is easy to line up. If you don't have one of these angle jigs, you should definitely make one. They're very easy and can be used for cutting angles or straightening crooked boards. The legs are all going to be assembled with pocket holes, so I drill holes in both ends of all the horizontal boards. With the pocket holes, the assembly of the legs is pretty straightforward. I glue and screw all the joints together. I thought about putting a diagonal brace in each of the legs, but I decided to hold off. I don't think it's going to be necessary, as all the force on these legs is going to be a down force, but if I'm wrong, I could always go back and add one later. Each of the legs is a small caster like this, allowing it to be mobile even when it's open to 4 by 8 foot. I attached the first longer leg, that will be the inside leg when it's all folded up. I start by attaching the leg with just a couple of screws, just to ensure that everything functions as it should. Once I'm confident that everything is correct, I go ahead and put the rest of them in. The hinge is attached to the leg on that tapered board that I cut earlier. When I attach the leg to the frame, it too needs to be at that same 3/8 of an inch angle. That will allow the leg to be straight when it's open and slightly tilted up when it's closed. With both legs attached, you can see how they nest inside the base when closed, and both of those casters swivel freely. With a straight edge clamped to what will be the tabletop, I also double check for a consistent gap the length of the leg. With the base nearly completed, you can see how it rolls easily and all 4 legs fold out to its full size. Moving on to the tabletop itself, I just cut a piece of 3/4 inch plywood into 3 equal pieces. I chose this style of hinge because it will keep things aligned and prevent things from warping, especially on the tabletop. When installing the hinges, do not use those tiny screws that come with them. Use the longest screw that you can for the material you're going into. I'm attaching the top with 4 countersunk screws. I'll add more screws later when I'm confident that everything is perfect. When I attach the folding sides, I intentionally leave a small gap right here. That will allow me to lift the top higher, making it easier to fold the legs out later. I'm going to add some boards to the side for added strength and stability. So I clamp the board on to test its fit several times before attaching with countersunk screws. If you remember earlier when I attached the legs, I had a 1-inch consistent gap between where the tabletop would be and the legs. That was to leave room for me to add these stiffeners underneath the tabletop. With this side complete, you can now see how everything functions and folds into place. The other side of the table is assembled exactly like this one. I grab a scrap board to use as a shelf in the base, and then pre-drill all my holes. With the bottom shelf installed, the base is now complete and very rigid. Once I've tested everything, and I'm happy with the functionality, I go back and install the rest of the screws. If you wanted to use this as a folding assembly table or a workbench, your project would be done now. I'm building mine specifically as a cutting station, so I'm going to attach foam to all the surfaces using double-sided tape. This will allow me to replace the foam as they get worn and damaged. I'm excited to get this space cleaned out and be able to use my door again. This bottom shelf is going to be used to hold the vacuum I use for my track saw, as well as the track saw itself. You can see how quick and easy it is to switch between a table that is small, medium, or large. Again, you could easily tweak the measurements to make it small enough to slide underneath your workbench or fit into any corner of your shop. Thank you for watching DIY Minded. Please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and share this video on social media.